Hello, I welcome you and I thank you for watching. At this point we're going to take up where we left off in the previous video by discussing positive change that will help all of the people. Contrary to those who don't want change, there are many people all over our country and all over the world who do want positive change and who see the need for that kind of change. A need that has now become a necessity for change that will benefit the great majority of the people and the country itself. I'm not speaking of the currently popular Tea Party movement. They are a tool, whether wittingly or unwittingly, of those at the top, and they're dividing the country even further. Their funding comes from some of those who are ultra-wealthy, and they are without realistic positive goals, only divisive ones. I am instead talking about change that would include things like quality education, including college for everyone, universal single-payer health insurance and health care for all the people, and having these things available at very low costs, or ideally that they be at no cost, so that they can be enjoyed by all the people. There should also be additional jobs created, as well as retraining for industries that have experienced declining numbers of jobs that are not likely to return. That training should include child care for the children of the trainees, so that they can attend training without the need to be concerned about who will look after their children during the hours of daily training periods. These are but a few of the changes that should be carefully and thoughtfully planned, funded, and carried out. In addition, we must repair and update the country's infrastructure. This is very important. We must get rid of offshore tax shelters, reform the tax system so that it will be equitable and fair for all. And that doesn't mean sales tax for everybody, because that hurts the poor and the middle class. That doesn't mean a flat tax, because that hurts the poor and the middle class. That means equitable taxes for dividends, for capital gains, and for other such things. It needs to stop unnecessary corporate subsidies and welfare. You're getting the idea. This could happen if enough people of like mind are willing to come together with a common purpose and a common goal, and if that purpose and that goal are worthwhile and truly for the benefit of all. Then the goals can and will meet with eventual success. Positive change can you come to your city, to your state, to your country, and even to this planet, if enough people who want it come together and work for a common purpose. Today you may ask where the funds for such things can be found. My response is that there was no problem finding all the necessary funding when an earlier administration wanted to fight wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, or when that same administration, through lack of regulation and oversight, allowed the greatest worldwide financial collapse since the Great Depression, and then massive funding had to be found to keep the corporate structure afloat. The same corporate structure that caused the problem in the first place. Then, to add insult to injury, those in that corporate structure were given the money with no conditions. There were no strings attached. The working people and families of the United States and other working people around the world have been in equally dire straits for years, but there was no headlong rush to help them in a massive way. Aren't people more important than corporations? It would appear that they are not considered to be given the way that the current system under which we live now works. You must remember that a corporation is not a human being. It does not have a soul. We know these things to be true, so we should be asking why the laws and the courts have not only given corporations the same rights as human beings, but why have the laws and the courts even given corporations a legal advantage over human beings? Trying to point out problems and suggest solutions is a process seldom accomplished without detractors. There are powerful interests in the United States and around the world who have a vested interest in the status quo. They want continued cheap labor and unemployment, which perpetuates cheap labor, and they have used the media and other means to persuade a large percentage of the population that change is bad, or even worse yet, that change is something to be afraid of. Those who suggest that there are problems and that positive change that helps people and families is needed are too often met by the response that somehow those changes, unless they directly benefit the most wealthy among us, are bad for America and for society as a whole. Too often you'll hear the words, "Hey, this is America, love it or leave it." Hundreds of millions of people, and I include myself, love America very much. But if we see where people are suffering by the hundreds of thousands or even by the millions, and remain quiet and attempt to do nothing because trying to fix those problems and pointing out the conditions that caused them is going to cause us to be called un-American, then I ask you, who is truly being un-American? Those who recognize that there are problems and are willing to work to fix the problems, or those who see them happening but believe that things should be left alone because it isn't patriotic to point out that change is needed? Who's being the real patriot? Who's being the good Samaritan? If we see the air being polluted and the streams being poisoned by pesticides, and we simply leave or keep quiet, how will these serious problems get fixed? As long as it reduces the bottom line a bit to fix things, the political and corporate establishment aren't going to bother. They will very likely do a lot to make it appear that they're going to make significant positive change, but they really aren't going to bother other than to give it lip service to the changes that are needed. In addition, they will cry loudly that the country will be ruined beyond repair whenever Congress does, on rare occasions, step up to try to improve things for the people, for the environment, for the infrastructure, and for the country. You will very likely hear cries of socialism or communism or economic ruin for the country, etc., as we see work being done to help the people. It happened during the health care debate that took place in both of the administrations of President Barack Obama, even though that legislation was characterized by many as being politically to the right of health care legislation proposed by President Richard Nixon during his administration. You need to also be aware that there were conservatives saying exactly the same things about the legislation being socialism, communism, and the ruin of our country, when other legislation was being debated and acted on earlier during the 20th century to create unemployment compensation, Social Security, voting rights, Medicare, and other social legislation designed to help protect the average citizens of this country. As you can see, those who cried out that these were going to ruin the country were wrong then, and they continue to be wrong about such things today. They're trying to make you afraid of change that will be of benefit to you and your family. As long as they can successfully accomplish bringing about that fear to prevent you and others from accepting positive change, they can keep most of us desperate to find and keep work in order to pay our bills, regardless of salary or benefits that the wealthy see fit to pay. If we who love America yet still see needed changes just leave it, who will be left to cry out for right when so many wrongs are being perpetrated against so many decent people in our country each and every day? Who will be left to do the work needed to get the changes accomplished that are so desperately needed by so many? No one would be left who really cared about solving the problems. That's no solution to anything. You will notice that I haven't suggested that you write to your congressional representatives, although they've been known to make changes if massive numbers of their constituency make enough of a fuss that causes them to want to avoid taking the risk of not being reelected. There are from time to time a few politicians, or those from the ranks of political activists, who stand out as brilliant exceptions. Sadly, as few of these as there are, a great many of them don't last very long. If they seek the kind of changes that are really needed, and they're at all effective, they become potentially dangerous to the status quo, and they are then often ridiculed, scandalized, or in some other way discredited in an attempt to make them ineffective. If everything else fails, something worse may be done in order to neutralize them as a serious threat. Most of the time, however, it is difficult for average politicians to be part of the solution when they are so busy being part of the problem. I'm saying that the people of this nation who want change and who see the need for change should come together. There can be great strength in coming together, even if it is only at the voting booth, and I am not necessarily suggesting that it must be limited to that. There is great power in nonviolent dissent. Both Gandhi and Dr. King have shown us proof of that. if you're not capable of nonviolent dissent, then you should stay home, because you simply provide the excuse needed to turn people away from your cause, or to have them turned away by the media and the powers that be. And you provide an excuse for those in power to characterize all who disagree with them as being violent lawbreakers and those who want to destroy property, or worse yet, to destroy the country. There's great political power in coming together, but you must be certain that your gathering is nonviolent, and that your goals and your agenda are not selfish ones, but that they are for the good of the country, and even more so for the good of all of the people. No such gathering should be carrying signs that demean or mischaracterize the opposition. The truth will be enough. If we deviate from these high principles, then the chances are increased that no change will be brought about, and that those maintaining the status quo will continue to do so by the same methods as before. It would not be beneath them to hire people to join a crowd of dissenters with the purpose of damaging property or committing other acts of violence in an attempt to discredit the dissenting crowd and the movement as a whole. Unlike most legitimate nonviolent dissent in this country, such acts of violence planned and carried out in order to discredit legitimate dissent would receive significant and repeated news coverage, which would discredit the movement as a whole. And of course that's what it's designed to do. And you may rest assured of that. One example of a technique that some politicians have used successfully is to tell the people that if we vote for them, they will get big government off our backs. These are code words that really mean to business and the corporate world, help us get elected, and we will sponsor legislation that will deregulate everything that we can get away with deregulating, and that process will help your bottom line, because it will allow you, the corporate businessman, to conduct business in any manner as you will, with the premise that anything goes. This is the same kind of deregulation that brought about the worldwide financial collapse of 2008 and has caused millions of people to lose their jobs and or their homes and their retirement. Yet many of those same people who lost their jobs and or their homes actually voted for the deregulating politicians then, and have once again in the 2010 elections put back into office and into majority power in the U.S. House of Representatives, and in 2012 in the U.S. Senate, many of those same persons who instigated legislation and policies which brought this calamity upon our country and its people in the first place. I suspect that unless these voters learn and accept the truth, they will probably continue to do so again and again. How very sad that big money and big media can be so persuasive, and that some of the people can be so forgetful. I ask you again, why are so many of you still voting for these people? We should all remember that many of the regulations they want to change or even drop completely are the same regulations that force business and the corporate world, as mentioned previously, to give working people a 40-hour week, a minimum wage such as it is, safer working conditions, help with our health and life insurance, time off for vacations, and a myriad of other benefits that were not given to us voluntarily. These things were brought about because the people insisted on them, and we're now seeing them dismantled and taken away piece by piece at an increasing rate of speed. In addition, when these people may attain a majority, regardless of their high-minded rhetoric about jobs and freedom and lower taxes, they actually give you personal restrictions on the right of a woman to make her own decisions about her health and her body, including transvaginal probes and restrictions on contraceptives, among many other things. They also pass laws about whether some of our citizens can or can't marry, or try to, and other equally undesirable legislation to restrict personal freedom, including the right to vote. Don't allow yourself to be deceived by their divisive rhetoric and misrepresentations of fact. As long as there's nothing to prevent them from doing so, many of the most wealthy, by continuing the disproportionately influential and detrimental practices that I have described here and other similar measures, assure that far too many of those who are the wealthy elite and I mean those who own or control a substantially disproportionate share of industry, the corporate structure, property, etc., they continue to be the wealthy elite, with their children and their grandchildren succeeding them into perpetuity. They now have the gall to call those who disagree with them the elite, to try to turn the people against any dissenters, when in fact they, the ultra-wealthy, always have been and are now the true elites, and many of them are working very hard to make certain that they remain so. There are exceptions, as I have pointed out, but they are few and far between. I and others would call our society less and less of a democracy and more of an oligarchy, a society controlled by and for the sake of the wealthy elite, with the intent to make certain that there is no change to that status quo. Some might say that this sounds like another wild conspiracy theory, but in fact I'm not saying that there is some dark conspiracy at all. I'm saying that after so many years of doing these things that I have described, those in the top 2 or 3% of the wealthy who are continuing the practice have no need to sit down together most of the time and conspire about their next move. They know what they want and they know how to get it, because they know what works and what doesn't. So they, often through their representatives and agents, just keep doing what has worked in the past, with an occasional innovation on someone's part to keep things moving in the direction that they want. However, if you truly do not believe that there are various groups of such high-level people, meaning the ultra-wealthy and powerful and or their agents and politicians, who do meet regularly or via the internet or otherwise on a scale that is international, national, statewide, or even at the local level, to plan strategy and to decide how to best carry out their plans, incorporating into those plans any innovative ideas they may have conceived, to increase their fortune and their power by reducing wages and benefits to employees and others, thereby virtually eliminating the middle class and ending up with only the very rich and powerful and the very poor and powerless. If you don't believe all that, then you're either ill-informed or you're extremely naive. If this sounds like a conspiracy to you, then perhaps there is a conspiracy after all. That's not for me to say. Meanwhile, during the administration, which began in 2000, prior to that, of Barack Obama, about one-half the country's population, with the dutiful help of the media, were satisfied, believing that everything was as it should be for the moment, and that those in power were doing all that anyone could to make everything even better. Some of them didn't understand what was going on. Some of them didn't even know what was going on. Some of them didn't care what was going on. But a few of them both knew and understood what was going on, and they are still today, even after the new administration was elected in 2008 and again in 2012, passionately doing everything they can to make sure that the political environment continues to favor the wealthy and the corporate structure in which they, the wealthy, are so heavily invested. I'm talking about the people at the top. Once again, I say thank you for watching this video. I hope it has been enlightening, and I encourage you to watch the next video in this series. Thank you again.